So, hello, Mike. What interests me, how you started with Java. So, are you a programmer, developer? What was your first line of code?
Oh gosh. So yes, definitely I was a developer in the past. But I have a very sort of odd career path. My first degree was in business. So I have a commerce degree. But even as I was finishing off that degree, I realized that I loved programming and being a developer more than business. And I went after a couple of years of working at Bell Northern Research. I went back to school and got a master's in basically in software engineering, and did a career change in the late '80s. And so, in terms of programming languages, I've professionally programmed in COBOL and APL, going way back. But I spent most of my career as a developer working in Smalltalk. So when Java came along, I had years of object-oriented experience and working with a virtual machine-based language, and really understood that kind of technology well. But by the time Java came along, I had started transitioning my career away from being a developer to being more of a product manager, and then later a business development guy. So in terms of professional interaction with Java, I think probably the first real one was I was the strategy manager for Visual Age for Java back in the late '90s, and that was when I was sort of first really involved in Java. Then I worked at WebGain, which had WebGain Studio based on Visual Cafe, and then ended up at Oracle, where I was leading a team in engineering involved in the Oracle application server development. And then for the last 14 years, I've been at the Eclipse Foundation.
And were you also involved with TopLink at Smalltalk side?
I was actually, and even at WebGain and at Oracle. I mean, I actually have a business card in a drawer somewhere that says Vice President of TopLink, back in the early days of WebGain. So that would have been around, say, 2000. And yeah, so the first developers of TopLink, Wayne Beaton is actually works on the staff of the Eclipse Foundation. He and John Hyland were actually the first two guys who developed the original version of Smalltalk TopLink. And then later on, guys like Alan Knight, and Dennis Leung at the Object People worked on TopLink. And yeah, I actually worked for a couple of years at the Object People, and was part of, and we got acquired by WebGain in 2000, and I worked at WebGain from 2000 to 2002.
It's interesting. I interviewed Sean Smith about serverless and persistence. He also reported to working with TopLink and Object People. You know Sean?
Yes, I know Sean very well.
Oh, that small world, right?
Yeah, well, Sean is part of the Canadian cabal that secretly runs the Java world.
Ah, okay. So Canada rules again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny. Like, so in the Java ecosystem, just here in Ottawa, where I live, so guys like Donald Smith, who's the senior director of OpenJDK product management, is based in Ottawa, and on the same side, then John Dujmovic, who was IBM's CTO for runtimes and was the guy who led the development of what is now the OpenJ9 virtual machine, is also based in Ottawa. So there's actually quite a few things happening locally that are pretty central to the Java ecosystem.
I think John delivered keynote at the Java One, I think, right? This was the guy.
Yes, yeah, that's the same guy.
Yeah. And I think James Gosling is also from Canada. Is it true?
Yeah, he actually did his first computer science degree at the University of Calgary. Yeah, so he's Canadian.
So this is a crazy world. So Java is 80% Canada.
These days, it feels like it's 80% German, but okay, sure. Okay. It started in Canada. How about that?
What's also funny, so you said you worked with Visual Age for Java. So I also used Visual Age for Java, and it was completely different than all the other IDEs. because
Yep.
you were only able to see one method at time. So it was like there was no easy way to print out the source code of the whole class, for instance. And I also had to work with Visual Cafe for Java as well. So I also used that. So really enjoyed that. And back then, I think Visual Cafe for Java had the unique opportunity or possibility to convert Java to binaries. So there was like a built-in feature where you can just create, a Windows application from the Java code. So I remember that.
Ah, interesting. Yep.
Yeah. And
Yep.
what also interests me, it seems like you really liked OSGi. So I'm just curious, your OSGi love, was it more as a platform level or application level?
It was more actually the interaction that I have with OSGi is primarily based on the experiences that we've had with it at with the Eclipse IDE and in the various Eclipse runtimes that were built up around it. And so at the core, I'm a very pragmatic person. Mm-hmm. And so the reason why I like OSGi is because it really did help solve a particular problem for the Eclipse platform and for the Eclipse ecosystem. And it was right around the time that when I was starting at the Eclipse Foundation, so I started at the Eclipse Foundation in late May of 2004, and in June of 2004 is when Eclipse 3.0 shipped. When that was the version that transitioned from having a homegrown plugin model to an OSGi-based plugin model. And that transition was happening right around the time when I was first starting at the Eclipse Foundation, and so I was kind of immersed in the world of possibilities around OSGi. Mm-hmm. And as you've seen with the 14 years since, there's Jigsaw and the platform modularity story, and it's. A lot of people get very religious about these various pieces of technology, and that's not particularly my style. I am more of a pragmatic person. But ultimately, I think OSGi has its difficulties, not because there's anything inherently wrong with the technology. It's because it's hard to modularize something which didn't start that way. And so a lot of people have frustrating experiences when they take a large monolithic application and try to break it up into modules. And certainly a lot of the times I've read people complaining, and I suspect we're going to see this as people start taking on the platform modularity story as well. It's just like taking apart a large monolithic piece of code and actually trying to stitch it into a useful set of components is difficult. And you see that with people grappling with microservices as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's also my opinion. So OSGi is fine for cases where you have the different version of a module. And the problem I saw is there are lots of talks about OSGi and modularity, and just the enterprise architects listen to the talks and try to apply the ideas from platform development like IDEs or application servers to business applications. And there, what I saw recently is like one war containing, I would say, 30 jars and all having the same version. And I ask, when you need modules then, if you ship everything at once? It's just, there is no added value. So OSGi is fine if you have the use cases, and you shouldn't just modularize because you can.
Well, you should. Well, that's generally true of all technology, right? You should use the technology that actually helps solve the problem at hand. But using technology because a particular type of technology because it's the style of the day or because your boss read about it in a magazine is been one of the constant sources of frustration for developers forever, right? I mean, it's use it when it's appropriate, and don't use it when you don't need it.
Perfectly. And you started the Eclipse Foundation in 2004?
No, actually, so I'm the first executive director, but it was actually started before I got here. So the bylaws were done, the membership agreement was done, all of the basic framework for the Eclipse Foundation was done when I got here, when I was first hired. But I would say that what I started with was sort of a template or a plan for what the Eclipse Foundation could be. Mm-hmm. And, through 14 years of my particular style of doing things and particular personality, I think has helped shape the way that the Eclipse Foundation has evolved and the way the Eclipse community has evolved over the years. But no, it wasn't that I created the Eclipse Foundation. It's just that I was the first executive director.
Okay, got it. And now shifting gears to Jakarta EE and EE4j. So can you tell us when Oracle approached the Eclipse Foundation? When was it around? So rough time.
It was almost exactly like 11 and a half months ago. It was, I think, as I recall, I got a text message from Mark Cabbage, who was the VP at Oracle at the time, mm-hmm. Saying, hey, can we hop on a quick call? And I was actually on vacation, sitting at my lake house, exactly where I am at the moment. And so we connected on the phone, and he asked me, hey, if we were thinking of open sourcing Java EE, would the Eclipse Foundation be willing? Would the Eclipse Foundation be willing to take that on? And my reaction was yes, absolutely. I think it would be great for the technology, great for the community, and it would certainly be a great opportunity for the Eclipse Foundation.
Okay, and the EE4j name, which was controversial at the beginning, was it your idea or Oracle ideas, or what about the EE4j?
So I guess I'm not sure if it was my idea. A whole bunch of us were talking about various names on the phone at the early onset. Okay. But just to talk about that for a second, I think part of the reason. Well, I wrote a blog post about this. Is part of the reason why people reacted negatively to the EE4j name is because there was confusion, and I have to bear some of the responsibility for that confusion because obviously I did a poor job of explaining it. But there was some confusion around what that name meant. So EE4j is simply the name of the top level project at Eclipse. It's sort of like an organizational artifact of how the Eclipse Foundation works. And we have top level projects; they need names. Oftentimes, the names are uninspiring acronyms like EE4j. Mm-hmm. But people, when the name first came out, people thought that was what we were going to use as the brand, which was never the intent. We always knew that there was going to be some other name that was going to be the brand.
This was also not clear to me, so I also was very negative. And then you wrote the post. It was around Java 1. And then I got it immediately because there was some legal issues with Oracle. I think it couldn't be Java or something like this. So I said, okay, I got it. If it's pragmatic name, so it's perfect.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm thrilled with both the name and the logo that we ended up with. Yeah. I think Jakarta EE is a great name. Props to the Apache Software Foundation for, being willing to let us use it. I think that it's a nice nod to the past of the early days of Java and the excitement that was happening around that time. And the logo, I think, is awesome as well. So it was a lot of emails and a lot of community, let's say community passion. How about that?
Yeah.
But in the end, I think where we ended up is a great spot. Like I said, I absolutely love the name and I love the logo. So I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
Was it your idea with Jakarta?
No, absolutely not. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but we had that GitHub issue where people were nominating names, and so somebody on that list threw out Jakarta. And then I think it was David Blevins from Tommy Tribe.
Okay.
Sort of jumped on and said, hey, yeah, this is a great idea. And he introduced us to the right folks at the Apache Software Foundation. And he wrote a blog post about it would be a great name. And yeah, so it was, but it was definitely not my idea.
As I saw the name Jakarta, I knew it would win. It was just brilliant. It was like came out of nothing. And I remember the jakarta.apache.org, the home of Tomcat and all the other tools. And I say, this is just a really brilliant move, and this will win. And the logo is also, I like it a lot. It's a lightweight, I would say, logo, which is perfect.
Yeah, it's colorful. It's modern. Yeah, no, I'm very happy. Yeah, absolutely.
And what I'm wondering, would it be possible to rename EE4j to Jakarta EE to have less confusion, just one name?
No, and here's why. Jakarta is the brand.
Okay.
So just like, there are technologies out there that are built on Java but don't have the Java brand because for whatever reason they don't have the TCK license or the trademark license or so on. There are trademark considerations around Jakarta that we have to set the systems up to properly support. And so, and the other thing too is to remember that the implementation of Jakarta at the Eclipse Foundation, which is based on Glassfish, is one of many implementations under this new approach. So we're consciously being sensitive that we don't want to signal that Eclipse Glassfish is somehow more special than Apache Tomcat or WebLogic or JBoss. I mean, so we don't want to grab that Jakarta name and use it in a way at the Eclipse Foundation that nobody else can use it as. So that's part of the reason why, but to roll back and ask the question differently, or now that we have Jakarta EE and everybody has gotten comfortable with the name, at least in my experience, you almost never see anybody using the EE4j name anymore at all, which is the way it should be. The EE4j is just the PMC at the Eclipse Foundation. And
so for me, it's like the EE4j would be the SPI, service provider interface, and this API would be like, the spec, the brand, the Jakarta is most like that, right?
Well, I don't even think you're going to see EE4j anywhere in the namespaces. What I'm expecting to happen is that the APIs, the new APIs would be called something Jakarta, maybe, I don't know, maybe EE.Jakarta or org.Jakarta or something. We haven't even figured that out, but that's what the new APIs will be called. And the implementations would be at the Eclipse Foundation would be perhaps org.eclipse.glassfish or something like that. So I'm not even sure you're going to see EE4j anywhere in the namespace.
No, it's like the EE4j is like the container of enterprise projects, and it could be more than Jakarta EE. There could be
theoretically, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, for example, I could imagine Eclipse JNoSQL moving under the EE4j top level projects.
Exactly.
And that could happen in advance of doing the spec. It's just because, hey, we're sort of interested in enterprise Java kind of stuff. We think we should be under this top level project, and that would be fine.
And about the scale. So, how big is Jakarta EE? How much time occupy actually Jakarta EE in your, in your working day?
Gosh, these days a lot.
Okay.
I wouldn't even. It's probably consuming at least 50% of my time.
Okay, so it's a serious Eclipse project, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Well, but the thing actually, the part that's consuming my time isn't actually what you probably think it is. And let me explain what I mean by that. The open source project part of Eclipse of Jakarta is coming along really well. So the code contributions are coming in. The PMC is up and running and functional. All that kind of stuff is actually going pretty well. Where my time is going is in spending lots of time with Oracle lawyers and stuff like that, working on setting up the specification process. So that's where, and all the legal work with Oracle in terms of transferring trademarks, trying to figure out how much of the existing trademark, the Java X namespace, and the rules around how we can evolve that in the future. Being able to the trademarks about being able to take on the existing Java APIs, Java messaging service, these kinds of things. Anytime there's the word Java in it, the Oracle lawyers have questions about what we're going to do with it and how we're going to evolve it and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm spending my time. The open source stuff is working great. It's the stuff that hasn't been done yet around replacing the JCP for this technology moving forward.
Yeah, there is an EE4j project bootstrapping status page, and the status looks actually pretty well, so pretty good. There are lots of projects at 3 projects at 100%. I would say 60% of the projects at 80%, and there are some, JPA is not that, but because it's like progress 20%, but I think this is different to Eclipse Link. So as JPA, the specification is different to Eclipse Link, which is the implementation, right?
Yeah. So as I recall, all that project is the basically the jar file with the interfaces in it.
Exactly. And I read on the mailing list that there is some drawback happened with the spec contribution by Oracle. Is it over with the JCP spec contribution, or could it be reverted somehow?
I'm not. Some of this stuff is so specific.
Okay.
So the question is, I think what you're asking is, you read on the mailing list that not all of the specification documents are going to be directly contributed to the Eclipse Foundation, so
exactly.
that the community can evolve them. Yeah, and so that has always been true.
Okay.
Oracle has been saying that from day one. And so what we don't know yet is, as I understand it, there are going to be at least a few specifications that they can contribute the documents to us and can be evolved, but a lot of them will not be. And then what is still very much an open question is exactly what can we do with those specifications. So, for example, could we create a new version of the specification that points to the old version of the specification from the JCP and say, here's the delta. So there's, and the answer, and the thing about it is, we don't know the answer to that question yet. So when I say, and that's a perfect example of the kinds of things which are consuming a lot of my time, moving this forward. The open source stuff is actually doing really well and is very straightforward. It's the specification question and what we're going to be evolve and how we're going to be able to evolve it. That's what is still very much, so a set of open questions or open issues at the moment.
I have a question about that. So how it works? Is this like Oracle would like to contribute the specs, and then the lawyers are reading, the legal stuff around the specs and say, yes, we cannot do this because this and this happens? Or like, is this something like this? So
yeah, so I don't want to speak for Oracle, but yeah,
No.
it's something like that. It's like, it's sort of like they want this to move forward. They're, the business people, the engineering people that we work with definitely want to see this move forward. But some of these specifications are really old, right? So they're, they're looking at, okay, we have a document that was co-authored by a bunch of people, 15 years ago. Do we have all of the paperwork in place that says that there's no way that somebody could sue Oracle if Oracle contributed that to the Eclipse Foundation? And the lawyers are looking at that and going, well, maybe yes, maybe no. And I don't know how much time you spent with lawyers, but lawyers, they spend a lot of their time thinking about all of the things that could possibly go wrong.
So this actually a similar situation to if someone would like to change the license of an open source project. You will also have to ask, all the contributors, right? It's something like...
as I understand the concern from the Oracle legal people, it's very much like that. It's like, if it's basically, if people gave a license under the JCP process, to what degree could they relicense that in a way usable by the Eclipse Foundation? Right. So and those are extremely difficult questions to answer, right? I mean,
of course,
it's.
So the lawyers would like to have it bulletproof so that afterwards no one can sue Oracle, right? This is the idea, actually.
It's on, and maybe not even use the word sue. They want to make sure that they haven't, misappropriated anybody's contributions or done something with a contribution that happened under the JSPA or at the JCP in a way that is counter to both the spirit and the letter of the agreements that were in effect at that time.
Okay. Now, something more pragmatic. So let's say I would like to contribute something in one of the projects. So what I did before is before Java 1, actually, before E4j, I contributed some code to the JSON B and Yason project. So, and had to sign the Eclipse, how it's called?
Eclipse contributor.
Yes, exactly. So now I'm ready to go, or there is something else to do for me in order to contribute to or to participate in the open source projects, Jakarta EE projects?
There's sort of two levels of contribution, right? There's a contributor. So a contributor is somebody who has signed the Eclipse contributor agreement and is contributing, say, some patches or some features or so on. But they're not. But those features have to be reviewed and included by a committer on the project, right? And then the second level of contribution is you are nominated and voted in by your peers as a committer on the project. And if you're a committer on the project, then there's an additional piece of paper that needs to be signed. Depending on, there's two versions depending on whether or not your employer is a member of the Eclipse Foundation. So in your specific case, you are good to go to contribute bug fixes or suggestions to the Eclipse projects. If you did a bunch of those and the committers on the project like your contributions and think that you're doing great work, then they can nominate you to become a committer, and then there's some committer paperwork that needs to be done.
Okay.
Right. And the one thing I'd like to also point out is the Eclipse contributor agreement is different from most contributor license agreements because the Eclipse Foundation itself doesn't get any rights to your contribution. So that's actually different, right? I mean, if you look at the Apache Software Foundation, you give the ASF a license to the code. The FSF, you actually assign the copyright. The OCA, if you want to contribute to OpenJDK, means that Oracle has joint ownership of all of your contributions. The Eclipse Foundation our agreement is very, very lightweight. It just simply says that you understand that you're contributing under the open source licenses of the project, and that's pretty much it. And we want to have some record of who you are in case there's ever any questions about your contributions, and that's it.
I'm a freelancer, and so as I also understand, there is another way to support the Eclipse project, like a member, right? I could also be an Eclipse member, but I will have to pay something, right? So there are different memberships levels, and
well, yes and no. So the first thing to understand, let's say you're as a freelancer, you become a committer on an Eclipse project. Okay, if you want to, for example, run in the elections to become part of the steering committee of the Jakarta EE working group, or even of the board of directors of the Eclipse Foundation, you can actually sign. You sign the exact same membership agreement that Oracle and IBM signed, and you become a committer member of the Eclipse Foundation. So the Eclipse Foundation has this nice little hack in its bylaws that we are set up as a trade association and we are member driven, but our committers are members too. And so I and the staff of the Eclipse Foundation, if you read this right in the very first paragraph of the Eclipse Foundation bylaws, we have two roles. One is to make sure that our committers and our open source projects are well-functioning open source projects. And then the second one is to help establish a commercial ecosystem around those projects. So the point that I'm making is it's actually not true that you have to pay money to become a member of the Eclipse Foundation. If you are a committer you can become a member, an individual member of the Eclipse Foundation as well. Now, on the organizational membership side, there's 4 different tiers of members. But for example, the London Javin community joined the Eclipse Foundation as a solutions member, but because they're quite small and they have few staff, it costs them $1,500 to become a solutions member of the Eclipse Foundation. So the entry level fee for a single person company or a small company is very, very low. Of course, the big companies are paying a lot more money, and particularly the strategic members like Oracle and IBM, they're paying $250,000 a year, plus they have to lead an Eclipse project, plus they have to have at least 8 people working on Eclipse projects.
Okay, so one of the FAQ is the cadence in which the versions of Jakarta EE are going to happen, and this is still not resolved. And I think this is going to be discussed in the Jakarta EE PMC, in the top level project, right?
The release, well, it could. I think there could theoretically. So the first answer is yes. The first answer is yes. That's the right place to have that question. Is in the EE4j PMC. But the second part of that answer is, it is theoretically possible that we could have a different cadence between the specifications and the implementation. So the thing to understand is that the EE4j PMC has Glassfish plus all of the specification jars, the interface jars under its domain right now, and we'll probably also run the specification projects once we get the specifications process going. But that cadence is gonna be set by the community and by the committers and so on. To be very specific, the Eclipse Foundation itself doesn't have an opinion on how often its projects should ship. So it's not something that we particularly care about. It's going to be something that the community is going to establish, and they will do so openly and publicly, and there'll be, I'm sure, lots of debate about what's the right cadence.
But who will decide at the end? There should be a voting process, or there should be one, dictator, or what group of dictators, or just community, the majority, or how it happened actually.
Okay. So that's a good point, because that's in general, how all decisions happen at the Eclipse Foundation is ultimately it's the committers that decide. So one of the things that the word community gets used a lot in our world, of course, right? And then there's the question is, okay, so who are the sort of the voting members of the community? And in the Eclipse context, votes happen amongst the members and the committers. Somebody who downloads Jakarta EE and is part of the Jakarta EE community can express their opinions on the mailing lists and make suggestions and contributions, but they don't get a vote.
So it means what you should do as a member, and you would like to improve the world, you should provide patches, documentation, then you could become a committer, and then you can vote with one vote against the other committers. And if your idea is good, then your idea will go through, right? That is the essence of the kind of meritocracy that we run at the Eclipse Foundation. Yes. And this is a little bit different to JCP, because back then we had the Java EE umbrella spec, and if you were not committed but member in the umbrella spec, you could decide what comprises these specs. Of course, you couldn't usually. Oracle or Sun could, but this was in theory. This is the difference, I think, between Jakarta EE and the JCP, right?
Well, it's a different way of doing things for sure. And the way that we're planning on doing the spec process in the future, and as I mentioned earlier, we still have lots and lots of work, is the equivalent of the expert groups for specs moving forward are going to be basically open source projects. And so when I say committers, you might be a committer on a spec project. I suspect that eventually there is going to be a spec project for for the platform, and there will be committers on that project that are ultimately going to be making decisions that impact a wide variety of projects. So but the path to become part of that decision-making process is absolutely by becoming a committer and making contributions, and that's how you get an opportunity to be involved in these discussions and have a vote.
Okay, so this is actually a good sign. Is a very pragmatic way, to contribute something. So you have to show that you have actually the skills, and then you can vote, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of different ways to do things, but this has been a model that's been very successful with lots of open source communities. It's not that different from, say, how Apache works, for example.
Exactly.
So it's it's a committer-based meritocracy that makes the decisions.
And how to introduce a new project? Let's say I would like to have a crazy idea and I would like to enhance Jakarta EE with something different. So what would be the process? Well,
so down the road, once we have the spec project and so on going, and we're done all of this, these legal conversations, the way you would do that is you would propose a project at Eclipse, or and you would say that ultimately you can say we would like to be part of the EE4j PMC because ultimately we want this to be part of Jakarta EE, and it will be up to the PMC to decide whether or not it can be part of the EE4j PMC. It's possible that they might say, well, your idea is so crazy, go incubate it over at the technology PMC for a while, and then come back to us when you've actually got something working.
Okay.
That could be how they're positioned, but on the other hand, they could say, "Yep, come on in." And so, one of the things that we're consciously trying to do here is to change the culture of how the Jakarta EE platform is evolved to be code first as opposed to spec first. I've been around the Java EE world for a long time, and when I think of some of the big mistakes that were made, especially early on, it was because, in my view, there was times where people focused on creating specs without really demonstrating that this was the right solution for the problem at hand. Right. So I think what I mean. Let's pick on stateful session beams. That was a bad idea. But somebody wrote a spec for it, and in it went. And then so there was, years of implementing this and supporting this, and wasn't necessarily the most useful thing to do.
Remote entities. This is more obvious one.
Yeah, and so there's what we would like to do is to have build a process and a community where people try things out in open source first. And once you've demonstrated that two things: one, you can make it work, and two, that people care about it, right? That there's people actually using this in building real applications, and then you write this. Then you start working on the spec. So, kind of a code first community as opposed to a spec first community. And I think that's one of the things that we definitely want to help drive this. And I think drive this forward. And I really do think that is a cultural change, not just a process change. It's a different way of thinking about how you evolve the platform.
Yes, exactly. And actually right now there is I would say already a huge success. So I'm just on the Jakarta EE page. So the strategic members are Fujitsu, IBM, Oracle, Payara, Red Hat, and Tommy Tribe. On participating members, we have CloudBees, Microsoft, Vadin, SAP, Pivotal. So it's just crazy. I mean, there are lots of companies already participating. And what's really I'm curious about, do you know the story behind Microsoft? They just participating, or had they some talks with Microsoft? What's the story behind?
So they're participating, and they actually wrote a blog post when we did the launch back in April and said that, specifically they were joining because they want to be part of this new evolution of the Java platform. And I think it's part of an overall outreach strategy that they've got about trying to make Microsoft Azure more attractive for Java developers. So, as we all know, the world is changing to a cloud-based world, and Microsoft is definitely trying to attract workloads to Azure. And so making sure that they have excellent Java support and are seen by Java developers as active participants is something that they're very interested in doing.
And also a question regarding profiles. So there was a heating discussion. I also participated a little bit about the scale of the profiles, Jakarta profiles, and what interests me is your opinion. It's not the community opinion, your personal pragmatic opinion. So my point of view is, so the profile have to be pragmatic. They have to solve use cases. We shouldn't introduce profiles just because we can, or we can do something smaller. It has to be a use case, and there is this is a very controversial topic because people say, okay, we have to use profile, micro profile rather than nano profile, like the core profile, the legacy profile. And what I'm afraid of a little bit is the fragmentation. So if we get a couple of profiles, then we get the name EE4j, which is hopefully not visible, but right now a little bit is because it's just we have this happened 1 year ago, the full EE4j. Then we have Jakarta EE, and we get a couple of names with the profiles. So right now in Java, it's like everyone uses usually the full profile. The web profile is there, it's a little bit smaller, but I have to admit I never used that because there was no point of using using web profile in order to reduce the download size by 10% or something like this. And what's your personal opinion about profiles and Jakarta EE?
So I mostly agree with everything you just said. I think we have to be pragmatic. I think that profiles, care has to be taken in adding additional profiles. I do think that, or I would say, I hope that the micro-profile community joins the Jakarta EE community once we get the new spec process up and running, and that evolves to become the Jakarta EE micro-profile. I think that would be a reasonable path for that technology, and I think that was part of was really part of the original vision for what was going to be Java EE9. So I think that, but I think I share your concern about creating a whole bunch of profiles. But so let me put it a different way. I think it's a complicated story, and we're going to feel our way through this going forward. There's a lot of different interests in both directions. But what I can say is, so I've been on the JCP Executive Committee for something like 12 years now. I think I'm now the third most tenured person on the JCP Executive Committee. And I can remember the process that had led to the creation of the web profile. And it just seemed insanely political. And that's the part that I want to try to take out of this equation is that when there is we want to make it hard enough to create a new profile that we don't end up with a whole bunch of profiles for no good reason. Because that, you're right, that just fragments everything unnecessarily.
And this was actually the problem of Eclipse ideas, remember. I was a huge fanboy, Eclipse 3, as it came out. I exactly remember what you said was the OSGi and the legacy plugin story. And then we got so many flavors of Eclipse that I got asked by developer rookies, Java beginners, which Eclipse should I download? Eclipse for Java, Eclipse for testers, Eclipse for modeling, or whatever. And I was confused at the end. Now it's a lot better than it was 3 years ago or something like this. And a little bit afraid that the same could happen to Jakarta EE.
Well, the difference is that with Jakarta, there is going to be a specification committee that is going to be explicitly deciding which new profiles can be created. Whereas with the IDE packaging, it was relatively easy for somebody to say, "Hey, I've got a reason why I want to create a new package," and away they went. There wasn't, by design, there was not a lot of oversight. Whereas on the profile question, I think there is going to be quite a bit of quite a bit of oversight.
Oh, that's actually good news. So the committers could decide,
No.
and I think the committers are usually most of them are also the runtime committers, and they are more pragmatic.
I said it's the Jakarta EE specification committee.
Okay.
So there's elected committer reps on that, but then there's also the strategic members of the Jakarta EE working group. So there's going to be a lot of care taken around the profiles, because part of the reason why is the vendors who would have to implement and provide long-term support for the profiles are going to be involved in making the decisions. And of course, these become you can have various opinions on whether or not companies should have a seat at the table for these kinds of technical decisions, but they have to be pragmatic, because they're ultimately going to be basing their business on these decisions. So I think that's actually an example of where it's good to have them around the table. So so I'm looking forward to lots of conversations about what are the right profiles to create. I do think that we should have some kind of approach, which is code first. So if somebody wanted to create a sort of a packaging of a bunch of specs to say, hey, I think there's a market for this profile, let's try it out in open source. And again, once it's demonstrated that it solves a problem and that people want to use it, then perhaps we create another profile. Not just sort of, arguing about this in the abstract.
Yeah.
Let's do it in open source, prove that it works, prove that it solves a problem, prove that people care, and then we can talk about doing something at the spec level.
Exactly. And about the committee of the Jakarta EE, in order to participate in the committee, you will have to be the strategic member, right?
The strategic members automatically get a seat.
Yes.
Then there's elected representation from the enterprise members, from the solution members, and the committer members.
Exactly. So you could be a committer and end up being elected to committee, and you could also participate as a member. Is a company membership, and you will also get a seat in the committee, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. So thank you a lot for the conversation. Where can people find you on the internet, and your Twitter handle and online presence?
Yeah, so Twitter is what I use most, other than email, of course. And my handle on Twitter is M. Malinkov. We'll see you on Twitter.
So thank you a lot. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.